rioted in East Berlin, and only the arrival of Russian tanks and troops saved the day for Moscow-trained stooges in power in East Germany. The temper of the enslaved peoples was graphically displayed. Men threw rocks at tanks. All was not well behind the Iron Curtain.
There's some more officers up here that throwing rocks.
Sometimes the Negroes were not able to contain their anger, to remain non-violent, and they fought back. They threw rocks and broken bottles. There were reports that some of them had knives and guns. But Negro leaders said those people were not their followers. They were, they said, onlookers drawn in by what they saw.
In Chicago today, white mobs threw rocks and bottles at civil rights demonstrators. That story after this message about Mash's ham.
Along came World War II. And our uncles went to Poland to fight in Poland. Died trying to stop Hitler from killing white Polish people. And last summer, when we walked into Cicero, young Polish punks gonna throw rocks at us and call us niggers. Call us niggers.
At a rally in Oshkosh, Wisconsin today, hecklers threw rocks, eggs, and tomatoes at George Wallace. When an apple core struck him on the shoulder, Wallace dismissed it with the remark, "That's all right, it'll wash off. That's just a bunch of anarchists."
They then began indiscriminately chasing youths into alleys and up and down the streets, all the while being exposed to a constant barrage of bottles, bricks, and rocks. This reporter saw at least 3 white persons injured by thrown objects. One policeman was knocked unconscious when hit in the back of the neck by a brick. By late afternoon, 62nd Street resembled a battleground, with the police holding the street itself, Negroes taunting them and hurling objects from adjoining housing projects and alleys.
And for the moment, the disorder has ended. But if you believe the people of Liberty City, the causes are still there. Lem Tucker, NBC News, Miami.
In Fort Wayne, Indiana, 22 people were arrested early today after crowds broke store windows and threw rocks and bottles at police in a Negro neighborhood. No one was hurt. 8 people were arrested in Los Angeles after a gunfight between police and a group with the words Black Panthers stenciled on their sweatshirts. There were no injuries.
And in Rome, there was a huge rally with strikers and students carrying signs saying, "Death to the middle class." It looked for a while as if it might get nasty. They threw rocks and bottles at the police, but instead of attacking, the police withdrew in haste, whereupon the demonstration dissolved in a confused pointlessness, and the authorities said maybe Italy's big agony was over.
There's a grimness to it, really as if they were marching to war. As the bands passed the square called Waterloo Place, the Catholics, from the Londonderry slum called Bogside, began throwing rocks. For nearly an hour and a half, the police ducked a barrage of rocks, stones, and bricks. Then, with the familiar cry of "We shall not be moved," the Catholic mob pressed its luck.
Prosecution and defense attorneys exchanged sharp, bitter accusations in the courtroom, each claiming that the other is attempting to mislead the jury by distorting testimony. Pearson, who had been disguised as a motorcycle gang leader, told the court that he threw rocks at his fellow policemen during the convention violence, screamed at them along with the protesters, and was struck by the uniformed police 2 or 3 times. Pearson admitted he went so far as to call the police pigs.
For Catholics and Protestants to live together peacefully ever in Northern Ireland?
It is very possible, and in fact it must be done, and in many, many areas of our society it is being done.
Reverend, a greater part of this week they spent a lot of time throwing rocks and firebombs at each other. What went wrong?
What goes wrong in any society? What goes wrong in your society? Just fear, prejudice built up over centuries, people reacting because of rumor, because of background. This always goes wrong. It's happening in America.
It's the same policy that Mexico did. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel it. And no, I don't think anybody could ever change my mind about it.
Do you feel they could have done it in another way? Besides shooting the students, do you think they could have maybe at least used a little force of the rifle to push the students away? Did they have to fire?
Not when people are throwing rocks and bottles and stuff at them trying to kill them, no.
But can you correlate between a rock and a bullet? Can you correlate the difference? I mean, a rock might put
if it's going to hit you in the head. If it's going to hit you in the head, it can kill you.
Have you seen what the guardsmen look like when they're dressed up? You couldn't hit them with a 15-pound rock.
I beg to differ with you.
Up this hill, they turned around, got on their knees, and fired.
Did you actually see any of the students being hit?
I saw people fall. I don't know if they're being hit or if they just, scared and just dropped in the dust. I don't know.
Do you have any idea what caused it, why the shooting started in the first place?
Some of the students were throwing rocks at the National Guard.
What about the report that there was a sniper here? Did you hear anything about that?
No, I was on top of Johnson Roof, and they said there was a sniper up there, and I was there, and there was none at all.
About 1,000 demonstrators protesting the jail sentences for contempt in the trial of the Chicago 7 late today charged the U.S. courthouse in Seattle. They fought with police, threw rock. Police came charging out from behind the locked doors of the courthouse, swinging clubs and making arrests. Only hours after an explosion at a San Francisco police station, there was a sniper incident today at the city's Hall of Justice.
Jerry Rubin did go to jail, and although his followers did not free him, they have reacted violently. In Seattle, some 1,500 protesters assaulted the federal courthouse, smashing down the door, throwing rocks, breaking windows, and firing a tear gas grenade. They moved on to a window-breaking rampage in the downtown section. Police arrested 79. Similar, although less serious demonstrations took place in Berkeley, California, and New York City, as several thousand radicals...
To work hand in hand. I mean, I feel that if the policemen go out, do a good 8 hours work in a professional manner, they'll get the respect from the public, they'll get the cooperation, they won't be harassed, they won't be picketed, they won't have rocks thrown at them. This is what we have to work at, and up to now the DPOA has only been interested in economic situations where they're trying to see how much money they can put in their men's pockets and not really working on the basic issue, which we feel is community relations.
500 to 1,000 who gathered on the warm Sunday afternoon as they had many times before. But when undercover agents in the crowd called in uniformed police to make arrests for public drinking, it turned to violence. The crowd surged around the police and forced them to retreat from the park. Rocks and bottles were thrown. Police fired back with shotguns and pistols, mostly in the air, but one young person was wounded. Several patrol cars were overturned and set ablaze as the disorder spread back and forth across the park amid gunfire.
Make the name of Irishmen stink throughout the world.
In Northern Ireland, there is a new style of warfare, the British Army versus the Irish Republican Army. Crowds still turn out, as Catholic crowds did last night, to hurl rocks at troops and set fire to vehicles. But the guns also are out. Last night, 2 soldiers and 4 civilians were wounded. Also, a Catholic child died by accident under the wheels of a British Army vehicle. Behind the guns stands the IRA. Its motive apparently...
Hanoi this time. Then maybe I could say, yeah, I don't want to bomb Hanoi, if it's going to do any good. But I think the Army, I think everything today is kind of like the church, where I worked at the church 2 years as a youth director, and a lot of kids didn't like the church, and they thought the way to change it was to pull back and throw rocks at it, and I don't believe that. I think that if it's going to change, you've got to change it from the inside. Because once you alienate yourself from the people, they don't talk to you anymore.
Open up the system. It may not be perfect, but we welcome the tremendous change that has been made. And to the young people that we ask after Chicago to come in and work for change inside the system, instead of standing outside and throwing rocks, I say welcome. You really took us at our word. It looks like all of you are inside. Now we're kind of scared as heck about what you're going to change. We welcome the people that are on the outside of this hall, who are committed to the...
Until this incident of pennies and popsicles being thrown at Governor Wallace last Thursday near Lanham, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, the governor had not been heckled much this year anywhere in the country. Then Thursday night, 2 rocks were thrown as he addressed a rally in Frederick, Maryland, and more objects were thrown as he left that rally. This morning at a Wheaton, Maryland shopping center, the hecklers were out in force. They were quite young and for the most part not mean, although 3 oranges, some pennies, and some paper airplanes were hurled at the...
Cool in Washington today, and at one point a Secret Service agent gave the president his coat. At another point, some demonstrators threw apples, oranges, a few rocks, and a bottle, but the car was not hit. 4 years ago, Mr. Nixon's car was hit by some rocks thrown by demonstrators, and a half dozen arrests were made today near the area where the incident occurred.
If there was tension, it didn't show. One of the youngsters had a portable radio tuned to the soul music station. Some of the students sang softly to themselves, others talked with the city police officer assigned to the bus. I recall that some of them didn't want to come back after rocks and bottles were thrown at the buses last Friday.
I felt the same way. I didn't come to school Monday either after I seen what happened over the weekend because of the same thing. So I came on back yesterday and everything was all right.
Some of the Union people twice charged into the field near Hidalgo, Texas, throwing rocks and cantaloupes and using sticks, beating the workers who quickly retreated. Some deputies were called in to keep order after the owner of the melon farm appeared.
These people are not going to keep me from harvesting this melon.
At the main embassy gate, the marchers shouted anti-American slogans, and a few threw rocks at the building as the Marines looked on. A pair of demonstrators managed to climb over the high railing, and within moments, they had pulled down the American flag.
A short distance away, anti-war students at Ninduk College fought with police, insisting they would refuse to go into the Army. The number of draft resistors has mounted in recent months. The students barricaded themselves on the campus. They threw rocks, they broke up tables and chairs to fight the police, who charged at them with clubs. Pedestrians watched from the street. Some students were caught and arrested. A girl was among them.
Students marched in a candlelight ceremony commemorating the tragedy. May 4th, 1970, Kent students demonstrated against the U.S. invasion of Cambodia. Ohio Governor James Rhodes called in the National Guard. Some students threw rocks. The Guard opened fire, killing 4 students, wounding 9 others. Today at Kent, sculptures of the 4 students shot to death keep alive the memory of that day.
Because you don't want anybody, I don't mind, adults saying, I don't agree with you. I don't mind getting a few rocks thrown at me. I've had that too. I don't mind being cartoon. I may not like it, but I had a reason to fight back.
The Democratic leader of the Senate, Robert Byrd of West Virginia, has let the frustrations of Iran overpower his earlier counseling for calm. In an interview with the Charleston, West Virginia Daily Mail, Byrd said he wouldn't blame Americans for, quote, throwing rocks or eggs or anything else at Iranian students demonstrating in this country. And he added, I'd feel like taking a punch at one myself if I could get to him. Later, Byrd said in a statement that he does not advocate or condone any form of violence.
As was the case last Friday, the trouble today was centered around Tehran University. Some say provincial police fired the first shots to clear unauthorized demonstrators from the streets. The crowd built fires. Others threw rocks at the troops. The troops answered with volley after volley. Some shots into the air, but many more shots directly into the crowd. A man on the sidewalk appealed to a soldier to hold his fire. The soldier kicked him.
Right after thousands of celebrants streamed from the casinos and rampaged for 3 hours, smashing store windows and stoning policemen. Several persons were injured. Police used tear gas to break up the mob. They estimated about 4,000 revelers took part in the violence, throwing rocks, bottles, and anything they could get their hands on. Police said some of the rioters chanted anti-Iranian obscenities and carried placards, but they characterized that as more of an afterthought.
All at a laundromat on the city's predominantly black northeast side. A police officer was apparently jumped when trying to make an arrest. More police were called to the scene, and a crowd of about 200 turned on the officers. The crowd went on a rampage, overturning and burning cars and throwing rocks and bricks at passing automobiles. Before the 4.5-hour riot was over, police and sheriff's officers had to use tear gas to disperse the crowd. In all, 37 people were injured, including about 20 police officers and 2 television reporters.
There was more violence in the Northern Ireland town of Portadown today. A group of nearly 400 Protestant youth threw bricks, rocks, and bottles at police after authorities refused to let them parade through a Catholic area. Today's clash comes less than 24 hours after 28 police officers were injured in a similar clash.
A white judge in South Africa today sentenced 13 black schoolchildren to a total of 108 years in prison. They were convicted of throwing rocks at some houses in a rural black township and trying to set the houses on fire. The judge said he felt sorry for the children, aged 13 to 17, but in his words, quote, justice has nothing in common with maudlin sympathy, unquote.
Police opened fire in South Africa this weekend on members of a black labor union leaving a meeting in Durban. At least one man was killed. Police say union members provoked them by throwing rocks and bottles.
No way diminish the determination of our freedom-loving people.
The protest, which spilled off campus later, turned violent. Under South Africa's emergency regulations, we may report what happened next, but we may not show you. What happened next is students threw rocks, police fired tear gas, a right-wing student was attacked by the others, and a police film crew was stoned. White City, the neighborhood in Soweto where the killings took place, itself was quiet today. Barricades and debris from the night of violence still in the streets.
Steve Mallory reports now from Manila. Peace efforts also were a casualty on this day of violence.
More than 10,000 farmers marched on the presidential palace demanding land reform. Some carried clubs. Many chanted revolutionary slogans. Rocks were thrown. The crowd surged forward. There were bursts of automatic gunfire.
Want to make it the 22nd Muslim Arab state. It's not going to happen.
Moshe Kessler came here from the United States 5 years ago. He may sound like an extremist, but he is not. Not on the West Bank.
Why do you think they're throwing rocks to begin with?
They're throwing rocks because they don't want Jews and they don't like Jews. But I do like Jews. I'm not against Muslims, I'm not against Arabs, and I'm not against Christians. But I am for Jews. And this is the only Jewish country in the world. And we must maintain it and maintain law and order.
Determined that people would not be permitted to assemble. And to discourage potential protesters from leaving apartment buildings, they laid down blankets of tear gas. But not all the bystanders were government opponents. These people work in a government office building and said they saw a man throwing rocks at police. One of their group chased him down.
There was anger on the streets today on both sides of a very different sort.
The cash shortage and closing of banks has stopped so much commerce, it's come to a point where politics...
Or that they're recording, and it's possible that conversation might be used on the news. Is that okay?
Okay. But that is where 6 is.
6 is at the rocks. You have to blow your whistle at the 3 rocks in the desert. 3-eyed rock, they call it. Yep, blow the flute. And once you do that, if you do it in the right position, the palace will appear.
Whereabouts? What position?
Well, it's right between the 2 rocks on the side.
Where the three rocks are by themselves?
Uh-huh. Just
how do you get into that other town over on the side? I found the hidden town. But and where's the cross?
The cross is inside the 6th palace.
I have to get that before I can get in the town, right?
Well,
I keep running into something on the other side of the bridge.
Yeah, the cross will allow you to see the invisible items or
well, there's no way to get past that, I think.
Where'd you get that? Okay, the magical key you find in the hidden town of Kasuto.
Where's that?
Where's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know do you know where the 6th palace is?
Where the what?
The 6th palace is, the 3 rocks?
No.
Okay. Do you know where the dead town is?
Yeah.
Okay.
In there.
Okay, no. It's to the right of there. Okay?
You just keep on going right?
Right, and then you'll see the 3 rocks. Okay, after you see the 3 rocks, what you got to do is you got to go up to the right of there. You'll find a cave with some woods inside. Okay? And you go through the woods, and you got to use your hammer inside of the woods.
On the woods?
No, in the woods.
Watched and some cheered, and the police were nowhere in sight. The victim's only mistake was being white and in the wrong part of town.
These people are angry, and they have every right to
be. The anger kept pouring out. Crowds soon began throwing rocks and bottles and setting fires. Still, the police held back. The greedy began looting, and it continued for hours, unchecked. By nightfall, South Central Los Angeles was ablaze. Dozens of buildings had been torched, and fire trucks...
A number of other other people killed, mostly gunshot wounds, some the victims of random gunfire, and a couple of cases officer-involved shootings. The violence here has spread to other places. Atlanta, 100 young blacks marched on the state capitol throwing rocks at buildings and cars. Madison, Wisconsin, the windshields of some 34 police squad cars were shattered. Protesters smashing windows in a march through downtown San Jose.
In Somalia today, U.S. troops clashed with a hostile crowd in the capital of Mogadishu. Demonstrators threw rocks at a convoy of American military vehicles in an area controlled by warlord Mohammed Adi. The Americans responded with gunfire, and at least 3 Somalis were wounded.
Well, to the Middle East now, and the violence of both the present and the past drew attention in Israel Friday. Israeli authorities charged a Jewish settler with manslaughter for allegedly beating an 11-year-old Palestinian boy who had been throwing rocks at cars. The boy's death Sunday sparked violent demonstrations in the West Bank.